Hey everyone, welcome back to the Chain Reaction Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Shaughnessy, a co-founder at Delphi Digital, where we're 5 full-time analysts focused on institutional crypto research. If you aren't a subscriber, you're missing out, so visit the site while you're listening to this episode. One quick housekeeping item, this podcast is strictly informational and educational and is not investment advice or a solicitation to buy or sell any tokens or securities or to make any financial decisions. I may personally own tokens that are mentioned on this podcast, and to be specific, I am currently not participating in the Edgeware Lockdrop or the Signal or own tokens in Polkadot. With that out of the way, today I'm thrilled to have on Dillon Chen, who's the co-founder of Commonwealth Labs, to discuss the project they're launching called Edgeware. As a reminder, Polkadot is an interoperability platform that is set to launch in a few months, and Edgeware's goal is to bring smart contracts to Polkadot itself. This would bring smart contract functionality to Polkadot and allow it to compete with Ethereum, Tezos, EOS, and other smart contract platforms. Edgeware is currently running an innovative alternative to raise known as a Lockdrop. Instead of raising money from investors, Edgeware is allowing holders of Ether to lock their Ether up and receive Edgeware tokens in the future, or to signal their intent to back the project without locking their Ether to also earn Edgeware tokens. This is a really innovative approach not only to garner a large potential stakeholder base, which is critical for a project's success, but also to increase the value of Edgeware's future treasury without directly raising money from investors. Currently, there's 881,000 Ether locked and 1.2 million Ether signaled, or 273 million and 372 million in value, respectively. Edgeware is a high-profile project, and this is hopefully the most in-depth discussion to date on Edgeware, with a ton of great color on Polkadot as well. I hope you enjoy, and please share the episode around on Twitter. With that, let's jump in. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm thrilled to have on Dillon Chen, the co-founder of Commonwealth, which is spinning up Edgeware and is doing the lock drop process for Edgeware. Dillon, how's it going?
It's good, Tom. Thanks for, meeting up in person to do this.
Yeah, don't do too many in-person podcasts, but it's great to be a real human and do this in person.
I know. I spend too much time on Google Hangouts and other things, so it really is nice to see you in person.
Yeah, of course. Just give us your background, Dillon, and how you got involved with crypto.
Yeah, definitely. So I think in 2014 was when I first acquired my first Bitcoin. And so that was, I got paid at Sprayable Energy. Shout out to Devin and Ben. And I was also interning with a fellow Bitcoiner at the time, Eric Finman. He's also working on a cool crypto project right now. So everyone's kind of been in the crypto family. I think after that, went out to Penn and then was doing a little bit of network research, looking at different Bitcoin transactions and seeing what addresses were correlated. Was doing some dorm room mining with Drew, another co-founder of Commonwealth, and then investing out of Lockdrop Ventures and Turing Capital and looking at crypto products.
So great intro. And how did you decide to find Edgeware through Commonwealth, or what's actually the genesis that links Edgeware to Commonwealth here?
That's a really great question. So kind of Commonwealth, the entity, kind of got off the ground, I would say, at the end of last summer. And so 2018, essentially, if I'm still remembering correctly. And Edgeware specifically within the Commonwealth entity, we won within the whole space. We wanted to focus on governance as one specific key point. We wanted to make sure there was a place for everyone to get on the same page, just because Twitter, Telegram, Discord isn't always the right venue to kind of discuss different issues. So we kind of decided to prototype a product, which is like now the Commonwealth interface. And basically, we needed to find a way to bootstrap that product. And that's kind of how Edgeware came along. So we like to say we're in the right place at the right time. So I think in November of last year, we started to kind of like talk to a few folks within the Parity Web3 ecosystem. And, they were thinking about a few concepts related to Edgeware. And we kind of felt like, hey, this is something we should actually bring forward. And we kind of decided to go full bore into actually launching Edgeware. And here we are 6, 7, 8 months later. And it's been a whole wild ride since.
Quick turnaround time for sure. And just for our listeners, can you give just your elevator pitch on what Edgeware is and what are the goals of the Edgeware platform itself? I know there's been a lot of press around the Lockdrop and signaling, which we can get into later. I think that's been covered pretty extensively so far. But what are the goals of Edgeware?
Yeah, no need to beat the dead horse for sure. Edgeware, the tagline, it's a Polkadot smart contract platform. And so to unpack that, it's really a few things. You can write WASM smart contracts. So whether it's in Rust, C, C++, assembly script, you can write those smart contracts in a language that's most familiar to most developers. It is on-chain governed. And so any parameter change, inflationary, block reward change, those kind of all flow from on-chain governance. And then the third leg is essentially, okay, if it's on-chain governed, who's going to actually hold this token? And we decided to go with this more experimental approach to distributing tokens that we've kind of seen. And that kind of process went live a few weeks ago. So we're excited to have those results in.
That's incredible. So you guys are a smart contracting platform for Polkadot. I believe you're operating your own parachain. What do you guys solve that Polkadot can't do on its own? I mean, it's my understanding that Polkadot itself can't do smart contracts, I don't think. Are you guys addressing that need? And, if you can give some comparisons to Ethereum, that would be helpful too.
Definitely. To TLDR Polkadot itself, it's essentially just an interoperability layer. And so it's really incumbent on any parachain or, parachain, whether it's general purpose or application specific to provide functionality. So people should stake dots to choose the parachains that they kind of want on the network through an auction type mechanism. And so hopefully Edgeware will be one of those right at the beginning. We've kind of been working on it for a little bit. Edgeware specifically, since Polkadot is only for passing messages and value back and forth between these parachains, and then also providing security for this whole web of chains, they still need the functionality. And so Edgeware specifically, we decided instead of being application specific or just doing a DAO chain, there still needed to be this general smart contract layer.
Gotcha. So while Polkadot is an interoperability platform or a bridge between the two, you guys are handling all the smart contracts. So this would be anything, if somebody wants to build a dApp or a smart contract, you guys would handle all the logic?
Yeah, all the logic is inbuilt. And so you can, gas or meter transactions can essentially still happen on Edgeware.
Gotcha, that makes sense. And there's definitely some confusion, I think, at least my understanding is a little confusing because a lot of people view Polkadot as strictly a bridge, but they also have Substrate, which makes it really easy to deploy blockchains and apps. Do you, as a dev team building on Polkadot and building smart contracts for Polkadot, do you think this gets a little confusing from a Polkadot perspective on being a bridge versus hosting all these dApps, or do you view it only as a bridge?
So I guess when you bring up Substrate, so we build on Substrate, and so to actually kind of make that whole process of building a blockchain easier, I think Substrate for sure lives up to kind of its billing. I would say I don't think it gets too confusing because I think from Substrate it provides the easy package, and then Substrate also kind of builds in the hooks to actually become a parachain itself, and so it kind of still within the Polkadot ecosystem plays its role. But I may be misunderstanding the question.
No, that makes sense. I just always viewed Polkadot as a bridge, and then once they released Substrate, I was like, all right, wow, this might be somewhat competitive because anyone can launch a dApp or a blockchain pretty easily here.
I see. Yeah.
So moving forward, let's think, 5 years in the future, and you guys are doing smart contracts on Polkadot. What are some example use cases do you think you could enable? Would DeFi on Polkadot make sense here, or basically is it whatever developers want to build?
Definitely whatever developers want to build. That's always the kind of, it may be the whole premise of open blockchains. And there's another blockchain that obviously, or pseudo blockchain, whatever, that came out recently that we can maybe talk about. But the things that I'm personally excited about in the next few years are, I guess, specifically DAOs, different types of common networks, and then also maybe DID solutions to kind of we really feel like those are kind of sets of tools that still need to be built to kind of enable popular usage. So we'll definitely look forward to those on Edgeware.
That's incredible. Do you have any teams today reaching out to you guys saying, hey, we don't like building on Ethereum, we don't like building on Tezos, but we need smart contract functionality and, we can't wait for you guys to launch, or is it a little early at this stage?
There's a few in my inbox actually right now that I need to respond to. Off the top of my head, I think there's a few actually DAOs that are slated to launch on Edgeware. I think right at mainnet launch. Our node by a few guys out of Japan. Garrett is one of the members of there, and basically it's like a Moloch on Edgeware essentially type of thing. Who else? A few dexes have reached out. Some prediction markets as well. So DeFi type things, which I guess is only natural given the kind of usage that we've already seen, but no kind of like gaming related things as of yet. But it's been pretty good, honestly.
That's great. So it sounds like the developer community around Polkadot is pretty strong. I know it's early, and I know that there was like 20 projects launching on Polkadot a few months ago, but basically you guys are going to also make it easy, not just to interoperate with smart contracts on other platforms, but also with other parachains on Polkadot. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. So just moving on to the governance of Edgeware, how do you guys address governance, and do you ever have to interact with the governance of Polkadot itself?
Yeah, actually, so the kind of last part of the question that you asked, how would we actually interact with the Polkadot governance? So Edgeware has a live testnet now, and Polkadot also does as well. And they'll be transitioning to kind of like the full, functionality of Polkadot in the next few months on their testnet. And how we would interact with Polkadot governance, we would basically through this summer, we want to basically become a testnet parachain essentially, instead of being what we are now, just a siloed type of thing. But to get to the first part of the question. Kind of what is Edgeware governance and how do we think about it? I definitely think the first thing to frame this kind of whole discussion is that we're still really early in all these things, and we don't know the best ways. And hopefully, our solution is going in the right direction. But again, if you're listening to this and you think there are other things, would definitely encourage you to participate and spin up proposals or add discussions to the whole network. But governance on Edgeware is a few rings essentially. So we've built in an identity module so you can tag social identity, whether that be Twitter, Telegram, or WeChat if you're in China, to an Edgeware address. And then from that, you can start to do signaling proposals. So they're non-binding, but on-chain. And then you can basically build up a voting profile. And then you have democracy, so token-weighted voting. That actually does change parameters or issues different tokens from the treasury. Everyone votes on it, and so you should be able to choose who you kind of vote with from the signaling proposals. And then also, once this process has been voted, democracy kind of participants can vote in people onto a council, and so the council members are able to kind of influence democracy proposals by basically biasing how impactful or the difference between yays and nays have to be to get something to pass. That's Edgeware governance in a nutshell.
It's incredible, and it's way easier hearing from you than digging through all the docs on GitHub, so I appreciate that. A lot of talk is on systemic kind of changes, and it comes to mind that if people or developers start building smart contracts and applications using Edgeware as the smart contract layer built on Polkadot, changes to Polkadot could then influence those applications. So Polkadot at the base, and then Edgeware, and then the applications built on top. Mm-hmm. Do you ever see that as a potential concern, or is that something that's basically the same with Ethereum and Tezos too?
I think these are always multifactorial type of discussions, as well as kind of decentralization as a whole. Looking at just decentralization, we can ask if we're looking at a proof of work network, what's the mining pool concentration? What, how much stake is actually aggregated? Is it a singleton VM? Are these all how many nodes are there in general? And kind of the same way with governance in general, and how Edgeware interacts with potentially Polkadot. Overall, Edgeware is operating as a solo chain now. And so it can always operate like that. Two, like Edgeware can't, like, if and when, or let's say if, I would hope it gets voted in. If Edgeware becomes a parachain, essentially we have like a guaranteed slot for a certain amount of time. And so if you're building a DApp or a protocol on Edgeware, it's not going to be like automatically kicked off or something like that. I guess like those would be the two main things. There's a little bit of just misconceptions around how Polkadot operates in general.
Got it. That's great color. And the 2 year, I think it's a 2 year lockup for parachains, I believe.
Yeah.
How do you internally think about that from a planning perspective? Do you, set aside some money to make sure that you're voted back in, or do you have to like talk to the Polkadot community? Like, what's the best way do you think to approach kind of maintaining your slot in a parachain? And I know it's early and this is conjecture considering it's not launched yet.
Yeah, no, that's definitely knocking out that caveat is a very important thing. I think the Polkadot ecosystem and the validators will largely look at it from an economic perspective, since obviously Edgeware token still will be useful, essentially to pay for like transactions and prevent denial of services on the parachain itself. Edgeware tokens will also be paid to collators and then also Polkadot validators as well. And so I think it will be a pretty rational decision as well from that perspective. I think other kind of like carrots and sticks that may be used are essentially allocating, from Edgeware, the treasury, to different validators as well to potentially sweeten the pot. Those would be governance proposals that would happen on Edgeware.
Got it. That makes sense. And before we go into potential governance decisions for Edgeware, let's take one step back and talk about the treasury for a second. Mm-hmm. Can you, because that's what hopefully Edgeware participants and stakeholders are going to be voting to use to help fuel your platform here. Can you discuss how that's funded, how much is in there, or any metrics or the process for that treasury would be helpful?
Yeah, definitely. So in the white paper, we kind of laid out the kind of like initial vision. And so it's still, we're doing a lot of experiments, and this treasury is certainly one of them. So it's fully on chain, and essentially it's funded initially by the, inflation in the first year. So inflation is 20%, 10% is allocated to validators, and then 10% is allocated to this treasury. And basically through the Edgeware governance, you can create different proposals and then send tokens to different individuals, whether they be developers, people hosting meetups and things like that to kind of boost growth, so to speak.
I'm always concerned saying money on podcasts because I feel like I trigger everyone on crypto Twitter.
No, I'm with you on that one.
So the treasury is funded for the first year. Half of the 20% inflation goes there. Is there any funding after the first year, or is that basically your war chest as potentially Edgeware token could accrue value and increase, and that treasury could increase in value?
I definitely have no idea what will happen with Edgeware value in the long term. But what is kind of set aside in the protocol is the overall inflation. So 20%, it's disflationary. So around 1 billion tokens. So there's 5 billion initially at Genesis Edgeware tokens, 1 billion in the first year, 1 billion in the second year. And so if you look at the percentage numbers, it's 20%, around 16%, and then so on and so forth. And so of that 1 billion, 500 million will always be allocated to this treasury, unless future governance changes that parameter.
That's incredible. So, I mean, you're one of the few projects out there that has an on-chain treasury. I'm guessing you guys thought a lot about funding this. What was your decision to basically input a treasury versus, say, raising money from investors and starting a foundation or something like that?
Yeah, I think like the one thing that we thought of, there's never really one thing. I think from this whole process, we've learned a lot about just like blockchain in general. And I think the one trend that we can hopefully all agree on is that it hopefully is getting cheaper to build these things. And two, I think it really is the community that really makes these projects in general. And so I think we thought it would kind of like live or die based on the initial set of participants. So people who were coming over in the Lockdrop would kind of direct the network, and they would so choose like how the network would evolve. Yeah.
That makes sense. So we talked about the treasury because hopefully Edgeware stakeholders are going to be actively participating in deciding the future of the platform and how funds should be spent. And that's definitely a governance decision for sure. How easy do you envision it to be for stakeholders to not only propose changes, but also to vote on them, whether it be for the treasury or the consensus itself or the protocol itself?
That's honestly such an important question. And since we know kind of our friends at Aragon, they're actually participating in the Lockdrop process. But as of yet, that proposal had, I think, like 3% of A&T participating in that. And so one of the things within, I guess, the overall Commonwealth governance thought process is we need to make it really easy. At least we need to make a UI that is really easy to facilitate discussions as well as voting. And so hopefully we can kind of boost that participation. And so that's like how we think about things.
Got it. So as the smart contract chain per se of Polkadot, what do you think voters would really have to vote on, or stakeholders have to vote on to change your protocol itself? I mean, it sounds, I'm a non-developer, so from my perspective, it's kind of like, all right, this is deployed to power smart contracts. Mm-hmm. What could we possibly change?
Yeah.
What are some examples you think people might have to change on that's not treasury focused?
Definitely. Actually, we were having an earlier discussion today about with Adrian Link at Cryptium Labs. And so it was an interesting discussion basically about bridges. And so different primitives that might need to be built into the chain itself. I think to zoom out a little bit, Polkadot and I guess Substrate, one specific like technical paradigm shift is that on Ethereum, you just write smart contracts essentially. And so all the functionality is like stuffed into that. But on Edgeware, there's like other kind of unmetered transactions that can kind of go on. And so we built this module. Essentially, every validator will still like validate these transactions, so to speak. Basically alongside that, we can build more modules that can enable other functionality. So whether that be like primitives for zero knowledge proofs, or kind of like other associated functionality, those would be things that the governance would probably vote on.
That makes a lot of sense. So zooming way out for a second, and I know that you guys are getting a lot of press for block drop and signaling and all that stuff, but if we zoom out, you guys are really leading Polkadot in becoming not only an interoperability platform, but a functional smart programming platform as well through you guys.
I hope we can live up to that mantle. I feel like that's a lot to say, but it's been a lot of fun working with the platform. I think everyone on the Parity side, they're super helpful, just like discussing technical issues within Riot. There's a lot of other projects, within the ecosystem. And I think like we've been able to take advantage of those kind of, I guess, learnings along the way. Yeah, I hope we can kind of continue to build and integrate within the ecosystem.
Can't beat humble. I love that, Dylan. So moving on a bit, let's zoom way out to, not zoom way out, but let's focus on the lock drop and signaling for a second. Mm-hmm. I know it's been covered a lot, but just give us the brief overview of what your lock drop is and what signaling is. And for our listeners, I think this is extremely timely because I believe it's still ongoing. We have Algorand's Dutch auction going on, which is extremely innovative as well. So you're right in the middle of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd actually be curious to hear. I mean, I saw a few tweets on the Algorand Dutch auction, and it was bananas from like the few tweets I saw. But the Edgeware kind of distribution, I think, again, we wanted to make sure that a lot of participants could kind of come into the network right at the beginning in an open manner. And so I think around 2,500 different people have participated, or that's ETH addresses that have participated. There's been, I think, double the transactions that have actually flowed through the Lockdrop contract. But again, we wanted to make sure that we seeded the network with a lot of great participants. And the Lockdrop with this chosen mechanism, the Lockdrop itself, what happens is you lock up your Ethereum into the smart contracts for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. And then there's this other kind of add-on, which is called signaling. You don't lock for any amount of time, but you basically sign a transaction and you make sure that your ETH balance has a certain amount in there, and then we'll allocate some Edgeware tokens to you.
Got it. So you guys aren't doing a capital raise. You guys are telling people, hey, either lock up your ETH in a smart contract for a certain amount of time and get rewarded Edgeware tokens, or put your money where your mouth is and signal your intent through a transaction, and we'll give you Edgeware tokens, but obviously less than the lockup.
Yeah, the purpose of the lockup or the lock drop itself was not really to, again, like you said, not an investment thing. We really just wanted to distribute tokens in this network, kind of see the network from there.
That's a good point. So it seems that attracting the widest array and the most active community is central to having a successful protocol launch. And I know, thinking back, 0x made a huge point of this by capping their token sale and having, as many participants as they could. How do you think of success here? Like 5,000 potential addresses, I think you pointed to total, sounds like a lot. Do you expect, being cynical for a second, do you expect these people to say, hey, I'm just here for the money and the tokens? Or do you think people are going to say, hey, I'm involved and I can't wait to help this community grow?
I think there's a few, so definitely would love everyone to participate. I think we do have to be realistic about things. And I think a few other kind of community metrics that we might be able to look at are a little more indicative of the level of involvement. So I think off the top of my head, there's 130 people who've indicated that they want to be a validator, essentially, so that they've gone through the process of generating 3 key pairs, locking a certain amount you have to lock, and then indicated basically from that they want to be there right at network launch. And then other, kind of social community statistics, there's, I want to say a few thousand, whether it's on WeChat, Telegram, Discord, that of people kind of talking every single day about things they want to build, things that kind of, they feel like might need to be improved. So I think it's definitely been pretty successful. I think the top line number has also been pretty good. And we will kind of see kind of if it's done its job once the network launches. That's
another metric to look at. And I know you're here with me now, but off the top of your head, do you remember how much was locked or signaled at this time? Or
it was okay. So as of last night, it was 860,000 ETH locked, and I want to say 1.2 million signaled.
Wow.
Yeah.
Geez, so the aggregate of that is pretty crazy.
Yeah, it is. And honestly, it's exceeded our wildest expectations by any measure.
Yeah, that's incredible, especially for, I think you said, 6 months you guys have been working on this?
It's been, yeah, it's really interesting to see kind of something grow beyond your kind of own input. That's kind of been the startup kind of experience from that side for me.
Yeah, no, I agreed. And I wanted to ask about the Polkadot parity connection here last, because I wanted to focus on what you guys are building, because that's the most interesting part here. But how do you guys respond to the whole parities able to use their lost funds to signal intent, and this could be used to enrich them? How would you guys tackle that one?
Yeah, I always think this is really funny just because, and I can kind of see how there's misconceptions about this. I definitely want to back up and say Commonwealth Labs is an independent entity, and we are using parity substrate technology, but so are the 20 or so projects that are building within this ecosystem. And I definitely want to point out that everyone has been tremendously helpful in kind of getting this off the ground. And so definitely don't want to kind of cheapen that. But the Lockdrop itself is definitely an open experiment, is still the thing and operating word I would use. And so as kind of one subset of that experiment, we kind of, through the signaling mechanism, allowed different people to participate in the Lockdrop. And so you can signal on behalf of a contract that you created, and the parity multisig falls under that set of, it's a contract, so someone created it essentially. And so the other kind of addendum to that was what we said is, if you signaled on behalf of a contract and that those funds essentially are unable to be sent for the duration of the lock drop, we'll count that potentially as a lock, essentially. And so that's kind of how that's kind of been seen. And so beyond the kind of 2-week period, it's been crazy again to see the overall participation. And now that it's kind of become something more real, it seems like people are kind of honing in on that. But yeah, I don't know. I definitely want to zoom out and keep perspective. It's all very, very new to us and to the whole ecosystem as a whole. And so I definitely appreciate the eyeballs. And, I think that the scrutiny is, it's welcome, right? We should all talk about these things in the open.
So playing devil's advocate for you guys, because there has been some pushback there. If I were to play on your side here, I would say that wouldn't it be really difficult to build a signaling or a lock drop mechanism and just excluding their one parity contract? Like, how hard would that be to even do?
Well, there are definitely centralized, off-chain ways to do that. I think that's kind of against the spirit of the lock drop in general, and not really how we wanted to frame that kind of open participatory process. I think so. We're actually going to run some governance polls essentially over the course of the summer. And the process we're going to run is based on the Edgeware participants as a whole right now. We'll say we'll give you testnet tokens essentially in accordance with what the actual token split is. And based on that, we'll do governance polls. So it's what are examples that I'd actually like to see? So should we potentially just cap the lock drop now because we feel like we've kind of reached that goal that's already been kind of voiced in the Telegram? How should different locks be treated? What are kind of things that we should start to potentially allocate initially at the treasury in the beginning? Those are kind of things that we'll kind of even in a soft way without on-chain governance essentially test over the summer.
Incredible. So this is a great segue into your timeline. When do these tokens go live or get released? Obviously, depending on, there's also the lock drop period there to think about. Mm-hmm. But when do the tokens get released and when do you guys go live?
Basically all at once. So the lock drop it started June 1st. It'll end September 1st, UTC 00.:00. And the network is slated to go live September 15th. And so basically based on the Edgeware address that you so indicated in the course of locking ETH, that address will be basically seeded with the Edgeware tokens initially. And so validators will kind of all come online on September 15th. Token will all be allocated right at Genesis.
And on your site, I think you guys said you were giving away 90% of the tokens. I might be misremembering that. Mm-hmm. Is that the amount you guys are giving away?
Yes.
Wow. So you guys are giving away 90% of the network. It kind of reminds me of Stellar, but in a way.
Yeah, that was, I remember Stellar. I was there. So the bumper sipper.
Yeah, no, that's another story, but it's a short one. But back to you guys. So 90% is given away. How much to founders and how much to the treasury again?
So the 10% is allocated to kind of the whole range of initial participants that outside of the lock drop. So 4.5% to Commonwealth Labs, 3% to Parity for building out Substrate, and then other associated technologies. And then what is it? It's 2.5% to kind of close advisors and then early network participants.
Gotcha. And then on an ongoing basis, in the first year, there's 20% inflation. Half goes to the fund, half goes to validators.
Right. Correct.
Gotcha. Zooming way out for a second, I want to talk about devs for a second. When you're building, if a developer wants to build using you guys for smart contracts, do they have to build their application on a different parachain and use you guys, or do they build on your parachain? How do developers kind of think through building applications on Polkadot and Edgeware?
Right. Yeah. So I think the parachain model in general is all about, or I guess Polkadot is all about giving you the choices as a developer. So they're different. It may be a little, I will say adds a little bit of technical complexity if you want to build modules, additional kind of exploits or other things that you have to worry about, as opposed to just writing smart contracts. But if you were just writing a smart contract, you should just be able to basically interact with the contract module itself. You should be able to build in Rust or those other languages that I mentioned before, and it should be pretty similar or essentially the same as kind of what we kind of know and love from these other smart contract platforms.
Gotcha. So the experience seems pretty easy from a developer standpoint. Do you think that it's easier to build on you guys versus other platforms, or do you think to developers at this point it's just another walk in the park, or what do you think? I say walk in the park there questionably. I know it's hard.
I think, I think the North Star that we're looking for is to be able to appeal to those like college hackathon hackers, right? And so I think we're always a little bit further away there. There's always work that needs to be done on documentation. There's, whether it's an online IDE and these kind of other associated pieces of tooling, like those are still important. Remembering back to when we first started building on Ethereum, we needed block explorers. We have those now. We needed a faucet. We have those now. And there's pretty good documentation on building some smart contracts. So like at least the bare bones stuff is there. And so, we'll continue to improve that in the next months and years. And hopefully the community will as well.
Yeah, that's definitely the key here. And do you think that Edgeware offers anything to developers that they can't get building on other platforms? I mean, obviously there's massive trade-offs between Polkadot and other platforms at the base layer, and that'll attract different developers. But like, is there anything Ethereum is trying to do, or that Tezos is trying to do, or EOS or Bitcoin that you guys enable now? I know you mentioned WASM, and I don't think Ethereum has that yet.
Yeah, no. The eWASM team has been working on basically implementing that as one kind of option in ETH 2.0, I believe, and they've had a few test nets up, and then have been working on associated kind of tooling around that. So EVM to WASM or transcompilation, essentially. Yeah, that is not included now, but. I don't know. I should stop there on that question.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Well, closing out, Dillon, who do you think is the smartest person in crypto?
I mean, it depends because I think crypto, I think it's often tweeted, and I think it's a reality. It's like a whole different can of worms. So you have to know a little bit about game theory, a little bit about network security, cryptography, all these other things. And so if you're asking about one specific subset, I might be able to answer a little better. I mean, I guess off the top of my head, I've been really interested in more economic models lately. And so I'm just going to say SDLR because I've actually shout out, but the different patronage models and playing with Harburger taxes, I think is one of the things that I've always been most excited about. And if I were to go I'll just go with Vitalik. I think that's an easy one to go.
It's always an easy one. I hear that a lot. And one more rapid fire question, because we do have some more time. Any initial thoughts on Facebook, Libra, and do you think this is competitive, or what are you thinking here?
So obviously potentially huge geopolitical considerations. I think honestly, it's been picked apart, and pretty nuanced debate has happened on Twitter. I think, so from my perspective, the validators, they can earn fees basically from just the security token that they might have. And then also just from fees that kind of pass through Libra itself. If you're looking at from maybe a pure business perspective, I think it would definitely make sense to be a validator on Libra. And if we're looking at Alipay and the fact that they already have 240 billion under AUM in 4 years, you could kind of see the scope on what Facebook might be able to have. And then to look through if it's competitive from public crypto, public blockchains, and then the other things. I think it's not competitive, and I do think it's something that can be an on-ramp, but there's always the factor of hey, we're already trying to decentralize Web 2, right? And and so if they already have such massive reach, maybe it might be a closed ecosystem that locks everyone in. That's something, I mean, I would need to noodle on a little more, but that's for sure. I can see arguments from both sides, and I don't think we'll see that in the early days.
No, that's incredible insight, and that's appreciated. And building on that, do you see a world where non-crypto devs or crypto devs build on Facebook and interoperate with Polkadot and Edgeware, or am I jumping way too many mental hops right now?
Actually, I was thinking about that literally right before this conversation. I was looking briefly again at the Libra white paper. So we know the validators are the only ones that it seems actually have access to like the full transaction set. And so you have to just like query everything. And so like, it's not even like a light client, if I guess, but you can still, well, there's the state root or whatever they're calling it, and these other things. But I mean, if you could build a bridge, that would be really, really amazing. I would need to think through what it would actually look like, but
my take is that the first smart contract platform to integrate with Facebook's UX is going to be at a huge advantage, but I don't even know if that's possible.
Yeah, well, yeah. Let's continue to dive in a little more. I guess it's all public now, right? So we can dive into the code.
Dillon, incredible insight. Where can people follow you and follow your project and learn more?
Yeah, I think Twitter is definitely the best public endpoint. So I am at Dillon Chen on Twitter. Hey Edgeware is, well, Hey Edgeware on Twitter. You can still participate in Lockdrop at edgewa.re/Lockdrop. Yeah, those are kind of the three places to really kind of plug. Definitely check out, us over there.
Dillon, it's been a pleasure having you on. I know we hopped around a lot, and this was great to do in person, but I'm glad we're able to hit on hopefully every major topic.
Yeah, no, I kind of think these conversations where we can kind of go deep on anything are kind of the best things for me. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Anytime, Dillon. Talk soon.
See ya.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the episode. If you learned anything, please share the episode on Twitter and LinkedIn. Feel free to tag us and visit delphidigital.io to learn more about our research.